Now, there has been mixed reaction to US President Donald Trump's nomination of Leo Brent Bozell III as ambassador to South Africa. The pro-Israel media activist nomination comes as the relationship between Pretoria and Washington hangs by a thread. Let's bring in international relations expert Brooks Spector for more on this. A very good evening to you, Brooks. Finally, the wait has been over. We know who will be our next ambassador from the United States. What do we know about this nominee, this person, Brent?
Well, good evening. Good to be with you. I think the key we have to understand about L. Brent Bozell III is that he comes from a family that has a long tradition now of being a supporter of American conservative views and increasingly fairly extreme right-wing views in many cases. His son, for example, was one of those people who was arrested at the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol building. His own relations go back to a father who was part of the editorial of the writing cohort with the National Review, which was William R. Buckley's right-wing conservative publication. Bozel he's a tireless defender of President Trump, tireless. I'm sitting here as we speak. I've got two of his books in front of me on my computer, and I'm trying to read through them all of his writing. He is constantly on the attack of the mass media, the so-called mainstream media. He sees it, if not a conscious plot, at least an implicit one that have over the years attacked Donald Trump. But interestingly, the very first essay I could find by him to read was his own initial encounter with Donald Trump before he became the official candidate the first time around. And he was not at all convinced that Donald Trump was a serious candidate. Since that time, obviously, he has become one of his strong supporters. He was originally tabbed to be the head of the U.S. Global Media Agency, which was the overall organization that would have administered the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Marti, which goes to Cuba and so forth. But the president, in his wisdom or otherwise, axed the entire organization, and Bozel obviously had to have a job because he'd already been promised one. What we need to do, though, is keep in mind that this is a nomination that has been announced. He has not gone before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee yet for his confirmation hearing, which is not necessarily a guarantee. There are more Republicans than Democrats on that committee, but not by very much. If the committee votes in his favor, then it has to go to the full Senate. And again, the proportions are a modest majority with the Republicans and a minority with the Democrats. Again, we can't predict that he's going to win that vote. But of course, also the South African government gets a vote of a kind in which once the name has been approved by the Congress, then South Africa is asked whether or not it will issue its agrément, its agreement with Bozel being appointed America's ambassador to South Africa. And at least at this point, it's not at all clear that the South Africans would immediately, as a government, jump for joy with this appointment either. So we have a couple of months yet before this is all tied up and neatly done, and the ribbon and the bows on the top of the package. But one thing I would caution, though, in your introduction, you spoke about him being a strong supporter of Israel. I don't think that's the major question in Brent Bozell's political circumstances. The real question, the core question, is his strident support for Donald Trump's agenda more generally. And I think that is where we need to pay attention. One other thing I would add, that he is very glib. He is an excellent writer, even if he's somewhat repetitive in all the things I've been reading. And you will find him, if he does come and if he is here, he's going to look for opportunities to appear on television programs like yours or on radio, and you will see him in the media a lot because he will, he will engage in the punchback. Let's put it that way.
Interesting. Also interesting considering that, he has this media research center that he's established. And on there, as you've mentioned as well, he is very vocal about the media in the United States and said, in fact, post the elections in the US where Trump won his second term, that the attacks on Donald Trump have backfired, basically saying, it was the media who kept away information about then Vice President Kamala Harris in an effort to try and paint Donald Trump in a bad light. So if he already has views like this about the media, it would be quite interesting to see if he does take that approach should he arrive here.
Well, I would think that given the way he writes and given his perceptions and views on the media, that you will find him really eager to take on media perceptions about the Trump administration or America more generally, because he is, as I say, glib, he is voluble, he's articulate, even though there's a certain sameness in his attacks from this media research center, which spends an enormous amount of energy documenting the number of times one newspaper or television network has a mistake in its analysis. I mean, that's the nature of your business. Things are said, sometimes they're right and occasionally they're not. But he will be keeping score, let's put it that way.
When it comes to mentioning backing Donald Trump and his policies and his views as well, one thing that has come across quite prominently so is DEI. And of course, we know Donald Trump's views on DEI. Is this something that we can also expect to extend from our incoming or possibly this new ambassador as well, that he will have these kinds of views? And I ask this because in South Africa, we do have affirmative action laws because of the past that we've had.
Well, let's make it clear for your listeners and your viewers that an ambassador, generally speaking, in this day and age, is not a freelancer. They have, I don't want to call it the party line, but they're given the parameters, they're given the nature of the arguments that they have to make on behalf of the government that has sent them. In the 19th century, an ambassador would, in many cases, before the advent of global telegraph networks, pretty much was on his or her own, almost always his. And they would represent their government as they understood the views, but they would not have been subject to 24-hour-a-day scrutiny and instructions and telegrams and email and so forth. But now, of course, Mr. Bozel, if he comes here as ambassador, is going to be getting direction like any other ambassador does to advocate policy A or policy B or policy C, and not simply to go out on their own and say whatever it is they wish. If you recall, the previous American ambassador, Reuben Brigety, got into a spot of hot water after a difficult encounter over the Lady R ship and whether or not it was carrying South African weapons to Russia. And, he let loose his opinion that he thought it was. And of course, your Department of International Relations and Cooperation called him in for a very serious talking to, and what amounted to a verbal slap across the face. He wasn't persona non grata out of the country, but it would have been logical to assume that his access to government policymakers was pretty much at an end at that point. I think a lot of people are going to find if Bozel shows up, he's going to be in demand among certain groups, among certain places, among certain, as I say, television networks and certain civic organizations. He'll be in demand as a speaker, and then at a certain point, he may overstep Washington's instructions, and the South African government might end up having a conversation with him about that. But he will be, if nothing else, he'll be entertaining.
Just in closing and briefly, just quickly, so Brooks, you did mention earlier that, of course, South Africa does have a say in this as well, whether they agree or not to this ambassador being the representative from the US. Should South Africa decline and say we do not want this particular ambassador, considering the relationships that have been strained between Washington and Pretoria, where does that leave our relationship with the two countries?
Well, it would be a little more strained after that announcement. But I mean, countries do decline ambassador appointments on occasion for a variety of reasons. Some of them, and they don't really have to announce them publicly. Let me give you a sort of a theoretical example. In a country ruled by a nasty military oligarchy, one of the prime minister's son, who's been known to be a drug dealer of considerable impact, is appointed ambassador, and the country who is receiving him would certainly feel it in their interest to say no thank you. Mr. Bozel's appointment will certainly not be in that character or that quality of things, but I mean, the host country does have the option. But it would then behoove the host country to figure out how to explain to the sending country what they would like to do next. And that will be an awkward conversation of its own.
Thank you so much for your insights this evening. That is, of course, our international relations expert, Brooks Spector.